The MLB franchise that we know today as the Chicago Cubs have had one of the most illustrious and historic histories out of all franchises in sports. And I would like to share some of that information with you. They were founded by a man named William Hulbert in the 1880s. They didn't start as the Cubs, they started as the White Stockings. And at that time, most teams were referred to as the city they were named, so they would be the Chicagos because they were in Chicago. And the name that came after was mostly done by newspaper writers. So at the time, they were called the White Stockings. They also were called the Colts because they were so young, the Orphans because they didn't have an actual manager, and then finally they were penned the Cubs, and that name has stuck with them ever since. Early on, the Cubs, or I guess the White Stockings, had lots of success. In their first 11 years, they won their 8-team league 6 different times. They went to their first World Series in 1906, ended up losing that one, but they followed that performance up with World Series victories in 1907 and 1908, which would have been the last time that they won the World Series for a very, very long time. Since they've had such a long history and they've had a bunch of really good players, they have had 53 players inducted into the Hall of Fame, which is where all the best players are, I guess, kept or whatever. Like their names are all, it's a very important milestone. And of those 53, 6 of them have actually had their jersey retired. And a team will retire a team's jersey after having a very long career with the team that's very successful. And basically, they don't want anybody else taking the value that number was for their very, very good players by wearing it and not performing as well. Those 6 players are Ron Santo, Ernie Banks, Ryne Sandberg, Billy Williams, Fergie Jenkins, and Greg Maddux, all of which are probably the best Cubs to ever play. Among with some very good career performances, there have been many fantastic individual performances. The most famous one probably occurred in 1998 by pitcher Kerry Wood. It was his 5th career start. He was a rookie at the time, so he's in his first year. He was playing against the Astros, who won 102 games that season and were very good, difficult to beat. But he threw a one-hitter, 20 strikeout game, which ties the record for the most strikeouts by an individual in any a single game. It was just a fantastic game. However, with great performances, there are also very, very poor performances. And probably the worst individual performance in a game, was that of a fan, not even a player. The Cubs were in the playoffs. They were playing against the Marlins in Game 6. They had a 3-2 lead in the series, and they were winning 3-0 in the 8th inning when one of the Marlins players hit a foul ball down the left field line. And Steve Bartman, he leaned over. He was sitting in the first row. He leaned over the fence and deflected the ball, which prevented the Cubs left fielder, from making a catch. And that made it very, very difficult for the Cubs as they lost an out in the inning, and they ended up giving 8 runs to the Marlins in that inning and lost, and were eventually knocked out by the Marlins the next day in the playoffs, which prevented them from getting to the World Series. So he had a really unfortunate event and potentially cost the Cubs a World Series appearance. Like I mentioned before, the Cubs, for a very long time, were very, very bad. They had a 108-year championship drought, which was by far the longest ever for any team. Currently, the longest one is the Indians at 68, the Detroit Lions in football at 59, and the Vikings at 56. since the Cubs won the World Series in 2016, finally breaking that streak. They no longer are the laughingstock of baseball and have finally returned to greatness just by winning one game on a Wednesday night in Cleveland. And as a Cubs fan, I am very glad that they have finally turned things around and have started winning again.